How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through my process all the way from planning to post-production of getting a shot of the full moon rising over a beautiful landscape at sunset. Let's get to it. Alright, so the first thing I like to do is jump into this site called mooncalc.org. And essentially what this is basically a light version of the photographer's ephemeris, which is that pay-for app that you can get, I think, on Apple or Android. But if you like to be cheap, you can pretty much just use this site and it works very similarly. And what it essentially shows you, if you can see what's going on here, is it shows you the arc of the moon, when it becomes visible, and how it kind of goes across the landscape. And what I have right here is a scene set up in Sedona, near Bell Rock and the courthouse butte. And I'm going to try to be set up here, which is along the Highline Trail, which is a trail I've been on several times, so I'm pretty familiar with what it looks like up there. And standing right here at this point on the trail, facing east and a little bit southeast, at about 6:45, almost 7 o'clock is when the moon starts to become visible. And it becomes visible just south of the courthouse butte here. And if you switch over to Google Earth, which is the other app that I like to use, which is also free, you can see what the view looks like standing on that trail from that exact same spot. So what you can see is that the moon is going to be rising, and obviously the one downside of Google Earth is that it doesn't show you the moon, it only shows you the sun along its path in real time, but it does not show you the moon. I would love for that to happen in a future version of Google Earth. But for right now, you have to use both apps together. So based on the path of the moon that you can kind of determine from mooncalc.org, you can see how as time progresses, about 7 p.m. tonight, the moon is eventually going to sit right between the courthouse butte and Bell Rock. And jumping back into Google Earth, that will be somewhere right in here. And what I'm going to try to do is frame this up by zooming in. I'm guessing this is going to be about somewhere between 90 and 130 millimeters to get this area cropped right here. And I'm going to have the moon rising, the full moon rising, and it's going to be shown somewhere in between these two rock formations. So it's going to look pretty cool. One thing that I've noticed, and they have to keep in mind, is obviously when is the sun going to set? And therefore, when are these rocks going to eventually have that soft blue light on them as opposed to the last remaining moments of golden light from the sun? And sunset tonight, as I checked on weather.com, is right at about 7:30. So, and you can kind of see that everything darkens on mooncalc as sunset happens. So that's kind of when you know when the sun is going to set. So at this point, once everything gets a shade darker, you know that you don't have any direct golden light anymore on these rocks. And what I would like to do is capture the full moon rising between those two rock formations with the last moments of the direct golden sunlight hitting those rocks. And something else I was able to determine using Google Earth is that the courthouse butte rock is going to be lit up directly from the sun in its final moments while it's still above the horizon. Whereas Bell Rock, this one down here, is already going to be in the shadows. And that's because of this rock, or this mountain rather, right here, that kind of blocks the sun at some point as it sets. So it's not going to look like this. This is a false representation of what it's going to look like. This rock face is going to be lit up by that last moments of sunlight. This rock over here, which is Bell Rock, is going to be in the shadows already. So it's not going to look exactly like this. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I think it will still look pretty cool. So essentially that's what I tried to do. And now that I've determined where the moon is going to be and what time I need to be there to capture this scene, now it's just a matter of waiting till the time comes to head out and get to this location. So I will see you there.
Okay, so instead of waiting around for the moon to rise, I can't sit still when there's a beautiful trail that I can hike. I'm gonna keep going up this trail, because why not? And what I'm trying to do now is find a certain juniper tree that I got a shot of last year that turned out to be my favorite shot of the year 2017. And I'll show it to you now on the screen. And as you can tell, it's really all about the light. That's what makes the image work. And right now, the light is not very good. So what I'm going to try to do is find that tree, set up a shot identical, at least try to set up a shot identical to the one I took last year, and show you how the light can change a picture from great to absolutely subpar. So let's try to find that tree. I found it right there. And you could already tell there's no picture here right now. The light is all in the background, super bright. The tree is not lit up at all. It's in the shadows. But I'm gonna take the shot anyway. And I'm gonna put up the two images side by side so that you can see for yourself how light dictates how good an image can be.
And we're back in the studio, and this is just one of the shots that I got that I want to work on. I've already kind of touched up several of the shots that I like, but I'm just going to kind of take you through my process with this one because this is a great example and will showcase my process in post-processing about how I go about setting up my shots with such a dynamic range of light happening here. As you can see in this image, I definitely underexposed it on purpose. You can see the histogram here. It's very, very toward the blacks, but nothing is actually blown out except for these little specks of blue down here, which show that it's absolute black. But all this dark shadow area that you can't see anything in the raw file, all that information is still there in the image. And the reason I underexposed is because that way you get all the detail in the moon and nothing is blown out with the highlights. And one thing I've learned from mistakes in the past is if you blow out your highlights, you are done for. There's really no way you can get those back. So always underexpose just enough that you'll retain all your information in the highlights, and it's okay to lose just a bit in the darks. So jumping right into it, the first thing I like to do is just see what I'm working with here in the shadows. And because I can't see it right now, I'm going to bring up my shadows and blacks all the way to 100 just to see the information that I have. And already you can tell, look at all this information down here that originally was completely dark. You can see how much it captured. And what I really love about this particular image is you have a beautiful contrast between the shadows on this rock and the part that's still lit up by the sun. And I really love that with this soft line going in between, which is due to the soft sunlight. With it being close to the horizon, all the shadows are much softer. So I really, really like this effect. What I'm going to basically do for this picture is bring out that bold red, orangey, fiery color in the rocks, because right now it's pretty subdued in the raw file. I'm going to bring up the overall sharpness and a little bit of more brightness down here in the shadow so you can really see the definition of the rocks. And of course I'm going to focus on the moon, potentially in a separate processing phase to this one. We'll see, to see how well I can get that in terms of the detail within the moon itself. So what I'm basically going to do right now is just bring down my highlights all the way. And what that does is it kind of brings back all the definition within your overall high parts of the scene in terms of the tones. So you have all that definition back there in the moon that you can work with. I'm going to bring up the whites just a bit, not too much, because again, that will reduce the information in the moon. Okay, that's looking quite nice. Now I'm noticing that the overall temperature is a little bit warm, although I might leave it like that just to keep that sunlight, but I just want to see what it will look like if I bring it down a little cooler. I like it a little bit cooler because you have it kind of enhances the contrast between the cool shadows and the warm tones in this rock. The sky is kind of, I feel like it's a little bit more toward the green rather than the purplish blue, so I'm just going to bring the tint a little bit closer to purple. You don't want to go too much, obviously. I feel like that's quite nice. And the next thing I like to do is really just jump right into my dehaze and see what I could do when I kind of reduce the haze or bring up the clarity, I guess you can say, within the shadows, which is what dehaze is really great for. But what I found is that when I use the actual clarity tool down here, that really, while it makes everything more dramatic, it kind of just makes it a little bit more unrealistic and adds more noise to the image, which I don't like. So I like to actually use this dehaze notch and bring this up quite a bit here. And as you can tell, look at all that. What's happening? It really creates more contrast. So I'm liking how that looks quite a bit. And everything is slightly dark, and I can go much brighter in my overall exposure. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring up my exposure, bring down the whites again so that I still have that detail in the moon. I don't want to go too much. I feel like that's just about right. And now let's work on the contrast. Just a little bit more contrast in there. Okay, I'm liking how that looks. Now, the overall color in this scene for the raw file is a little bit muted. And in the actual live standing there, this orange color in the rock was almost blindingly bright and extremely vibrant. So I'm going to bring up that vibrance to try to match what I saw. And obviously if you go all the way, it just makes it completely unrealistic. So you want to bring it up quite a bit, but not too much that it just makes everything unrealistic. I kind of like that. That's working nicely for me. I'll leave saturation as is. And next phase is go to the curves. And I still feel like the shadows are pretty dark. So I'm going to bring up the shadows on the curve and try to bring back the highlights right onto the curve. And what that does, it just creates a better balance between the shadows and the highlights. And with that balance, you kind of want to keep adjusting your contrast to make sure that you have a good contrast between the shadows and darks, but that it's not overwhelmingly powerful and feels like two separate images almost. So I really like this, where I'm holding right now. Now let's jump over to the overall colors. Make sure the hues are just right. This orangey color, I feel like I could go a little bit further to the red side. It's a little yellowish for me. So let's bring these back toward red. Don't want it to go too much. That's working nicely for me. And the sky is quite blue. So let me bring it closer to purple. Okay, I like this. And down here in the shadows, everything's pretty close to magenta, which I don't mind that much, but it's a little bit too pinky. So I might bring this over to red. I'm bringing the reds to orange. Okay, I feel like that's working well. Another area that I'm not sure about what to do is this background here. There's some greens and yellows there. I don't know if I like that so much, so I might go with saturation, just bring down the greens, and bring down the yellows a bit in terms of the saturation, because I don't want that to overpower the rest of the scene. And let's bring up the orange quite a bit more. I like that. Let's bring up the purples and the blues. Okay, this is looking quite nice. Now let's jump over to Illuminance, and Illuminance basically just controls the overall tone of the particular colors, how bright or dark each color is in the scene. So I'm going to take the orange knob here and just bring it up a bit. You can see what that does. It just brightens up the orange even more. I would like to brighten up the magentas because that's in the shadows. As you can see, if I bring it all the way down, it just kind of gets muddled with all the other shadows. So if I bring it up, that creates more separation. Bring up the reds a little bit more. And what I like to do is bring the sky down just a hair. You don't want to go too much because as you can see here, we'll start to get, oh, that was quite zoomed in a little too much there. As you can see in these sections over here, as soon as you go too much, you get this terrible, terrible outline of the rocks, and you do not want that to happen. So you're just going to bring it down enough that you don't really see it all that much. Okay. And what I like to do here is remove the chromatic aberration, which would get rid of that little fringe. There you go. You see that it got rid of the green and purple fringe edges to the rock. Let's zoom back out here. Okay, the next phase that I'm thinking, let's bring the blues back up just a little bit there. Okay, this is looking quite nice. Okay, let's jump over to the highlights and shadows, the overall color tone of each one, and just making sure that no colors are really standing out too much, except for that main orange color of the rock. All right, now for the highlights, I like to, for this time of day, everything is more in the blue and purple tones at sunset, right after the sun sets or right before. So let's go over to that area and bring up the saturation in the highlights. And what you could see what that does is just bring the overall highlights in the scene more to the blue and purple side of things. And we can just add a very slight vignette on the edges. Let's make it nice and soft. You don't want to go too much. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And what I would do now is bring this into Photoshop. And these shadows are still very dark. So what I would do is in Photoshop, I would, by layer masking, I would bring up the brightness in the shadows quite a bit more, especially down here at the bottom. You could also see, if you zoom in quite a lot down here, there are people standing on this rock, and you don't notice it at first, obviously, but I feel like if the people were more prominent in this picture, I feel like I would keep them because it's really cool. It's a really cool aspect of scale, but they're really not doing anything to the picture, so I might just clone them out completely. And other than that, I feel like that's pretty much it. So let's open this image in Photoshop. Okay, here we are. So what I'm going to try to do is basically, we're just going to duplicate this layer, and we're going to take the dark area down here in the shadows and just bring that up quite a bit more. Just going to raise that up and bring this middle area down slightly, just a hair. Okay, now obviously the overall scene is definitely lost a lot of contrast. So what you can do, you could do a few things with this, but we can really just go to, oops, not levels. Let's go to brightness contrast, bring up the contrast a bit. That'll help a bit there. And I think the overall tone with these little rocks in the shadow are still leaning toward magenta, and I'm not a big fan of that. So I'm going to try to go to my color balance here, and in this you can kind of adjust things. So drag from magenta back toward the greens. I feel like that's working better. And if I go more toward blue or yellow there, I could leave that. Bring this more toward red rather than cyan. Alright, I feel like that color is much more realistic. So look what we did. This was the original image we brought into Photoshop. That's the layer that we're going to work on for the shadows. Obviously everything in the highlights is blown out here, but we're not going to keep that information. So let's create a mask and just drag a gradient down over the highlights. And let's take our brush and just kind of brush out this area down here. Okay, that looks quite good, I must say. So what we did now was just bring up the shadows. I feel like it's a little bit too much, so we can bring this back down and find a happy medium where the shadows have enough definition and lightness in them so that you can see what's going on down there, but not too overpowering. I feel like this is a great balance between both. All right, this is pretty much going to be the final result. Obviously, I'll do some cloning down here, but overall, this is just about the final product. So, thank you so much, guys, for watching this video. I know it's a long one, but I feel like it's a very useful and practical guide to getting pictures of the moon with a landscape, because I know how difficult such an endeavor can be, as I've tried many times and failed because of the dynamic range in the scene. So I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something and gained something out of this video. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment down below. And please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already to my channel. And I will catch you on the next one. Till then, take care.